What are civil liberties and civil rights? Are they the same thing? The two are often used interchangeably and are almost about the same thing, but there are some slight differences that we should know. For example, free speech would be a liberty, but the right to be treated equally and the government protect you to make sure that you are treated equally, that is your civil right. So they are very similar. They are basically two wings on the same airplane, but they're a little bit different. So in this video, we're going to talk about civil liberties and a little bit about civil rights. In part two, will be more about civil rights. But through both of these videos, I hope that you are thinking about what this has to do with the role of the people. And we will slightly be in the deep end of the pool. So it may be a little bit difficult for you to get your brain around, but that's what's great about a video, right? You can pause it, rewind it, listen to it again, think about it, and then hit play. So, civil liberties and civil rights. They're both kinds of guaranteed protections as an American citizen. Civil liberties really are those protections that you're guaranteed and they protect you from government action. So think about your personal freedoms, the right to speak freely, to start a newspaper, to petition the government, to worship freely, to have a gun, to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, to have an attorney. All of that would be your personal freedoms, things you can do and the government can't do. That would be civil liberties. Civil rights are really more about protected privileges that if for some reason a state or a local government or the federal government treats someone unequally, then that causes the government to get involved and work to create equal conditions. So civil liberties, civil rights, when you hear civil, that means, connected to this nation. So liberties you have by being an American citizen would be civil liberties. And rights that you have being an American citizen would be a civil right. And that main right is to be treated equally. So usually, though, when we think about civil rights, we tend to think of those minority groups and women who've been treated unfairly in the past. Whereas civil liberties generally always apply to all Americans, and it's not usually associated with just one group. So think about liberties that you have, right? Liberties are doing whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. That's really what liberty is. When they wrote the Constitution, many people were worried that the Constitution didn't go far enough to specifically mention the liberties that you have as an American citizen. And so many people throughout the original 13 states pushed for adding a Bill of Rights to the Constitution that would specifically say this is what you can do and the government can't do this. So the government can't force troops to stay in your house, right? The Third Amendment says you have the right to be free in your home. You don't have to worry about quartering of troops, and the British had done that. So this is a way to keep you kind of free in your own home without having the undue burden of having troops in your house. So very specific. Started off with being more than 10, but they narrowed it down to 10 in Congress and then sent it off. And the country ratified or accepted the first 10 of the amendments. We call them the Bill of Rights. So these are rights you have as an American, and they can't be taken away. And it keeps you safe from the government intrusion. Now, I should say when it comes to your rights not being taken away, of course, if you violate some laws, then you might not be able to, say, have a firearm, or you might be put in prison where you can't speak freely, I guess, on the street corner because you're in prison. But we'll talk more about when the government can take your rights. But one of the big ones I want you to think about, because you've already thought about the first 10, but here's one that's been in the news a lot, right? You know about the rights listed, but what about the idea of a right to privacy? So nowhere in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights will you find this specifically mentioned. Like it will not actually say you have the right to privacy. And this issue has been one that the Supreme Court has wrestled with through the last few years. And it's one I think that an American citizen should know. Like, where does the Constitution come down on this idea of right to privacy? Do you have it, even though it's not specifically mentioned in there, meaning the Bill of Rights? So let's talk about some of this. The Fourth Amendment, says that you have the right to be secure in your house, on your person, like things that are in your pocket. The government can't just come searching your pockets without a good reason. They can't come searching in your house. They can't come look at all your stuff or important papers you might have inside your house. You're safe from that. There's no unreasonable search and seizure. Now, a reasonable one would be when they convince the police, that is, convince a judge or a magistrate that there might be things in your home. We believe there are things there that are illegal or they're causing a problem. We'd like to go in. So there's a process, though, they have to go through to get into your home. They just can't show up. So the Fourth Amendment protects you inside your house and on your person from unreasonable searches and seizures. But nowhere in the Constitution does it say specifically that you have a right to privacy. Now, you're a smart person. When you read this, what do you read? Do you read it as only on your person and your house and your papers, things you might write, or papers or documents you might have in your home or on you? Or does it go beyond that? So the real question about this privacy issue is, does the right to privacy exist? Is it a constitutionally protected right? And we know that it's not expressly written out in the Bill of Rights. So this is something that the Supreme Court has debated through the years. Even today, modern legal scholars will debate this. But generally, over the last 40 or 50 years, the Supreme Court of the United States, that's what SCOTUS means, Supreme Court of the United States, has ruled that when they've come down in their rulings from court cases, they have ruled, the justices have written, that there is a general theme in Amendments 1 through 4 and in the Ninth Amendment about privacy. Even though it doesn't specifically say, it is a general theme. In other words, they've actually said the amendments seem to cast a shadow. So Amendments 1 through 4 and the Ninth Amendment deals with the whole idea, really, of privacy in your home from search and seizures, no troops being in there. You have a right to have a gun, perhaps in your home, and you have the right to say whatever you want in your home, express yourself however you want in your home, worship if you want to in your home, read your Bible or the Torah or the Quran or whatever in your home. So those amendments are really, the theme of them would be privacy, and so those amendments cast a shadow that tells us that American citizens have a right to privacy. So this is something you should keep in mind as you move on through schooling and as an adult. While not mentioned specifically, the right to privacy, at least recently, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to be part of the Bill of Rights, even though it's not specifically mentioned. Keep that in mind as we keep on talking as well. So civil liberties are your freedoms granted by the Constitution. And in this case, as we just mentioned, the Supreme Court has said a right to privacy is one of those. But again, you could find some conservative members of the Supreme Court who would say they do not believe that a right to privacy is guaranteed in the Bill of Rights because it's not specifically mentioned there. So a lot of debate revolves around whether or not it's written there or whether or not it's a theme. This is part of the tension sometimes between those who interpret the Constitution as it was written. What did it mean when it was written? What did it mean to the people who voted on it back then? And how has it been kind of interpreted and made to be more of a living document recently? There's a lot of tension between people who are very strict constructionists of the Constitution and maybe some of those Supreme Court justices who tend to see the Constitution as being able to be stretched and to cover more than you find in the actual writing of the document. So civil liberties. Civil liberties are basic freedoms and rights that are guaranteed either by the Bill of Rights in the Constitution or by interpretations of those rights by the lawmakers, but more importantly, the courts. So again, that right to privacy, not mentioned specifically, but the court has generally interpreted it to be there. So this list of liberties that you have just for being an American citizen, you have free speech, and of course we've talked about right to privacy, right to remain silent while you're in custody or in court if you're apprehended by law enforcement, right to be free from unreasonable searches, right to a fair trial, right to marry, and a right to vote. Now again, right to marry and a right to vote, not specifically mentioned in there. Again, these are, the Supreme Court would say, these are themes that we find, and so it might not say everyone in America has a right to marry someone once they're of a certain age, right? That there are caveats to these, but there are limits to all of these. You can have the right to privacy, but you can't do illegal things in your home and call it a right to privacy. You have the right to marry, but states generally have put some rules and restrictions on marrying. Like if you're a minor, it's not really going to happen. You have to be a certain age, and if you're not fully an adult, not 18, but let's say you're 17, perhaps some states say you can do it if your parents sign off on it. There's a variety of things that states have done. The same thing with voting. It's generally a right, but not specifically mentioned in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. And in some cases, states can curb your right to vote. If you're a felon or if you're in prison, some states have said, no, you can't. But generally, these are the rights you have guaranteed to you by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and can't be taken away unless you do something wrong. And we'll talk more about due process in the next video. But what I want you to think about is, how does this even relate to you and as a citizen, the rights of the people? Right? These protections that we have are only protected as long as informed citizens know they have them and they vote for people in government who understand that these are protected civil liberties. So it's not something you can count on someone else to know about. You should know these things. Right? In America, we don't really have people who sit on the bench. We want everybody involved. We want you to understand your rights. Therefore, you know them and can defend them if needed. And you would vote for people who also understand your rights.